What if the sweetest memory were also the sharpest? What if the heart learned to keep what should have been forgotten, like a locked room that, from so much silence, begins to scream? What if promises were seeds cast into unknown soil, sprouting when least expected with roots that search for bones and names? What if time, that patient gardener, watered what we swore to abandon, nourishing shadows with the same devotion with which it nourishes daylight? What if every step forward were, secretly, a return? He, who needs no voice to tell his story, only the weight of memory, walks through a corridor of recollections that never ends. Nothing in him asks for pity. Everything insists on staying. There is always a murmur of rain waiting nearby, even when the sky seems clear, as if the world breathed through narrow cracks. There is the scent of old wood, of sea air, of extinguished candles. There is a place that calls to him, and that place has the shape of a mansion built on a cliff. Windows like tired eyelids, a roof slanted like bent shoulders, peeling paint like scars that refuse to heal. And what if the house were a body, and that body trembled upon recognizing who approached? What if love were only another form of damnation? What if what he once promised, without knowing what he promised, had been heard by walls, by photographs, by an attentive ocean, and by a curious moon that, at that exact moment, decided not to leave? What if every memory were a step on damp wood, creaking under the weight of regret? He doesn't need to say a thing. The wind speaks for him. The wind knows the cracks, the stained mirrors, the dust that rests like ancient snow upon the gold-worn frames, the carpet that drank tears and wine, and the footsteps of a night that forgot to end. Below the cliff lies a small town, its narrow streets curling into themselves, rooftops nearly touching. The marketplace sleeps early, and the square keeps a bandstand slowly devoured by moss. This town has learned not to ask questions, for questions sometimes awaken what sleeps with eyes open. And what if this town, complicit in the secret, had gathered echoes, old laughter, threads of song unraveling in the air? What if, far away, the church bell tolled for no one, as if calling those trapped forever inside photographs? He has returned, but the story did not begin today. The story is a tide that comes from behind, bringing broken shells, letters without an address, portraits that lost their faces. Only the frame of absence remains. And what if fate were this tide, a force that cannot be explained, that drags, that cleans and dirties, that gives and takes, and in the end, merely begins again? Promises, even those never spoken aloud, learn their way home. And when they arrive, they find the doors left slightly open. Love in that quiet form that requires no witnesses survives through small rituals, the habit of keeping a petal inside a book, the secret urge to scratch a date into a window frame, the gentleness of leaving a lamp lit in a room no one visits. And what if this love had learned to use darkness as its dwelling? What if twilight were simply the softest part of a feeling too immense to rest anywhere else? Fear, in turn, gives no warning when it arrives. It returns from behind, at the foot of the stairs, in the dripping faucet, in the portrait that insists on hanging crooked. And what if fear were the guardian of a promise that refuses to be broken? He moves forward, though it feels like retreat. Dust floats in the air, shining as it crosses the slanted light of afternoon. Somewhere a door upstairs creaks, a reminder of its existence. The sea repeats its language, a language of insistence. The body senses first what the mind delays. Shoulders tense, the nape tingles, the stomach slowly sinks, like one descending into a cellar. And what if truth were waiting down there, where the mold writes stories on the walls and boxes hide secrets folded with care? No one needs to know his name, for what defines him now is not identity, but the weight of a past come to collect its interest. He understands, even if he won't admit it, that the promise did not vanish with time. Time, in these lands, behaves like salt. It preserves and it burns. It keeps what should decay. It sharpens the taste of all things, even those not meant to be eaten. The mansion knows this. It observes. The shingles listen. The doorknobs remember. The corridors, as long as hospital halls, have learned to measure footsteps as if counting sins. And what if those corridors knew for whom they were made? Death here is a word that has already taken residence. But death is not what ends things. It is what prolongs them. For certain farewells expand life, even if through shadow, and certain presences exist only through absence. Fate writes with invisible ink, and only the light of certain hours reveals its handwriting. He, upon returning, unknowingly strikes that match. And what if life were merely that, the precise instant when the ink decides to reveal the entire sentence? A garden surrounds the house, a garden of plants that have learned not to bloom. Not out of neglect, but out of modesty. The leaves bear an ancient green, as if each had known another century. On some nights, a faint aroma of jasmine floats upward, and the night grows slower, thicker, almost drinkable. And what if that jasmine guarded the secret of the promise, breathing for it, perfuming what cannot be spoken? The heart, that stumbling clock, sometimes beats out of rhythm for reasons it only understands later. He realizes the house has its own pulse, a rhythm not aligned with his own. There is a silent pact between the wood and the wind, between the curtains and the moving shadows. And what if the mansion were alive, not as a monster, but as an archive, a sensitive one that reacts to touch, to memory, to intention? With each step, he feels pages turning in an invisible library. Questions do not demand immediate answers. In truth, it's better they don't. They create the space where the story can breathe, and in that breath, something from the past begins to pass through the walls. First, the feeling that an object is missing from a room, an empty frame. Then the sense that a curtain has moved an inch by itself. Next, a shift in temperature when crossing a particular spot in the hallway, as if the house had coughed. And what if memory did not live in the mind, but in the air that moves through the cracks? He remembers, unintentionally, that there were letters. Letters hidden in a false drawer bottom, with slanted handwriting and words written in the haste of a wounded heart. Letters that smelled of the sea and bore stains of tears, or perhaps rain. And what if those letters were the first attempt to keep the promise alive? A rope thrown into the well of distance. He remembers photographs too. Sepia faces learning to disappear from sight, retreating gently so as not to disturb. The love that brought him back does not use trumpets, nor noise. It is a love that prefers narrow corridors, that delights in the sound of soft footsteps on wood, that feeds on quiet noises. The faint clap of a window, the sigh of dust when a hand brushes it away. It is a love raised in absence, whose language is made of thin lines. And what if this love had promised never to leave the place of its birth, even if those who made it did? This is not about forgiveness, not yet. It is about recognition. Recognition is a mirror that never gives back the whole image, only fragments clear enough to unsettle. He sees his own distorted reflection in the window glass and senses that behind it, a room waits. The room has a scent, the scent has a memory, the memory has a promise, and the promise in turn has a price. And what if the bill were already on the table, pinned beneath the weight of a bronze candlestick? Night falls early when the soul is busy. Twilight is a language that offers itself to those who need to think, and he needs to. The sea breeze climbs the cliff lazily, carrying messages in envelopes of salt. The gulls do not cry. They sketch the sky with restraint. Far below, the town lights a few yellow windows, and each one looks like an eye that knows too much. And what if all those eyes knew what was about to be remembered? At the threshold between what was and what might have been, consciousness opens a crack. Through it, a thread of sensation leaks, a subtle blend of tenderness and guilt, of longing and fear. That mixture, he knows, has a name. The name is ancient, older than his return, older than the mansion itself. The name is a pact. And what if that pact had been sealed not on paper, but on skin, upon mornings that smelled of bread and drying laundry, upon words never spoken aloud, though everyone heard them? Now all that remains is the gesture of entering not only the house, but the story that has chosen him to be remembered. The handle turns, the floor holds, the air changes its weight, There's a corridor ahead, a staircase to the right, a room to the left. He moves forward like someone who accepts that certain doors were never meant to stay closed. And what if entering were itself a vow? The promise he made long ago does not reveal itself with noise or spectacle. It prefers a private flicker behind the eyes, a landing of silence upon the shoulders. He knows, without knowing how, that by crossing this threshold, he will have to speak with the mute portraits, obey the liturgy of memories, and gather from the floor what time has allowed to fall. And what if the house demanded an offering, not of flowers but of courage? His breathing slows. The heart seeks a rhythm that fits. The house responds, returning the beat as an echo, and something, impossible to say whether it's wind or memory, moves down the corridor like a dark hand pulling back the curtains inside his mind. Love does not retreat from fear. It learns to breathe within it. Death does not close a story. It stretches its edges like wet fabric hanging through the night. Fate, patient, watches from the corner of its eye. And what if, at this very moment, what once seemed inevitable began to move toward him? The question hangs like an ancient chandelier. What price does a promise carry when one spends a lifetime trying not to hear it? He knows there is no turning back. The cliff behind, the house ahead, the tide rising inside his soul. Everything demands the same act. Enter, ignite, remember. And what if, in igniting, something long asleep were to awaken, hungry? The prelude ends when the hallway light, trembling like a reluctant candle, finally steadies. The air composes the melody that will guide him. It is time for the story to begin, not with chronology but with place. For it is place that chooses time, and time that decides who remains. He takes the first step into the main hall, where the carpet knows more than any person, and the fireplace, though extinguished, still holds the warmth of a winter that never left. And as he crosses the threshold, the past, which had seemed so distant, approaches with the calm of the inevitable. That is how one enters Act 1, like someone pushing open a door that leads into a hall of memories and dust, feeling both tenderness and vertigo at once. The strange recognition that destiny has been waiting all along, seated, patient, in a worn velvet chair. The hallway feels longer than memory allows. Each step is a silent conversation with time, and time answers by creaking beneath his shoes, returning echoes of footsteps from others who might have walked this same path, in another era, with another guilt. The air is thick with moisture, as if the house itself were breathing slowly, inhaling recollections and exhaling ghosts. He walks carefully, attentive to the small noises, the groan of wood, the sigh of glass, the whisper of curtains shifting without wind. The mansion guards its silence the way one guards relics. It is not a peaceful silence, but one of vigilance, the kind that seems to listen more than it refrains from speaking. There is a smell of iron in the walls, of rusted sea, of old books forgotten on tall shelves. And in the center of the main hall rests a velvet armchair, wine-colored, its fabric stained in places that time has rendered indistinct. The upholstery seems to breathe. Around it, portraits watch the emptiness. Figures dressed in clothing from other centuries, eyes that will never meet again. Only the void, the same void that now watches him. The portrait on the central wall, the one that greeted him with its faceless absence, holds a hypnotic weight. Its dark, ornate frame seems to retain a trace of human warmth, as if hands had lingered there for decades. The surface of the canvas bears scars, the outline of a face long vanished, a soft curve hinting at a lost smile, a faint shimmer where eyes once were. He feels, not thinks, but feels, that this emptiness has mass, the precise weight of the promise that brought him back. The tall windows, shrouded in thick curtains, filter the dying light of dusk. Outside, the sky dissolves into shades of rust and violet. A mist rises from the sea, slowly swallowing the cliffs, and the sound of waves merges with the house's internal murmur. Perhaps an old pipe, perhaps the beating heart of the place itself. He approaches the portrait and notices a nearly invisible detail, a signature at the bottom corner, hidden under a thin film of dust. He wipes it gently and the name emerges, timidly, a name he knows too well. his own. The air shifts. A crawling chill rises from his feet to his hands, and his heart tightens as though recognizing a debt long unpaid. The signature is identical to his handwriting, the same firm curve he once traced in forgotten notebooks and letters never sent. Yet he had never painted anything, at least not that he remembered. And what if memory failed precisely where it was meant to protect him? What if the past had rewritten itself, adjusting the truth to meet the needs of the promise? A distant thunder announced the coming rain. The first drop struck the glass like a warning. The wind entered the house, dragging with it the scent of wet earth and rust. He closed his eyes for an instant, and in the darkness behind them saw the silhouette of a woman. Not a living presence, but a memory with the texture of a dream. A pale dress moving with the wind, long hair, the gentle curve of a neck. The face, however, remained as blank as that of the portrait. The heart recognized before the mind could. That image, or memory or hallucination, had a name echoing in his soul like an ancient bell. But the name slipped away, dissolving into the sound of rain. He opened his eyes. The portrait before him seemed sharper now, more defined. The face still absent, yet carrying a new depth, as if beneath the paint another painting waited to be revealed. On the floor near the cold fireplace, something gleamed in the pale light of dusk. He bent down. It was a small key, rusted yet whole. Its head shaped like a heart, its shaft long and twisted, as if crafted by hand in another time. From above came a soft sound, the creak of a door opening by itself somewhere upstairs. The house, generous or capricious, was showing the way. He gripped the key tightly, a shiver running down his spine, as if the metal had pulsed in his palm. He ascended the stairs slowly, counting the steps, one by one. The banister, cold and damp, felt like breathing skin. With every step the wind grew stronger, and the house groaned, alive. The walls displayed smaller portraits of people he did not recognize, though their painted eyes seemed to follow him, curious and reserved. At the final step, a long corridor stretched ahead, dark, lined with doors on both sides. At its far end, a white door stood closed. His heart knew the destination before reason could. The hallway smelled of sea salt and jasmine, the same perfume that lingered in the garden outside. And somehow he knew. The key in his hand belonged to that lock. The promise, silent and ancient, called to him through scent and shadow, like a song that had never finished being sung. He stopped before the door. His hands trembled. The wind ceased, as if the house were holding its breath. And before turning the key, he thought, or perhaps remembered, a single phrase, a seed of voice. Promises do not die. They only wait for the return of the one who made them. The key turned easily. The door opened with a restrained groan. The scent of dust and old paper drifted out, and the first flash of the storm illuminated the room for a single heartbeat, revealing, atop a table covered with yellowed sheets, an open notebook. And at the top of the first page, a date, today's date, written many years ago. His heart nearly stopped. What if that notebook was not a memory, but a warning left by himself, by a version of him that already knew what was about to happen? The sound of rain spread through the house, as if every roof tile had learned to groan. Droplets slid down the windows in slow trails, reflecting flashes of lightning that scored the sky. The air was dense now, saturated with humidity and remembrance. The man, who no longer knew whether he was a visitor or an inhabitant, stood motionless before the open notebook, studying the handwriting he knew better than any other. It was his, yet different. A firmness that time and fear seemed to have erased. The sentence echoed inside him like a verdict. The promise was made at dusk, and dusk does not forget. There was no way to fully grasp what it meant, but something indisputable lived in that script. A deep recognition, as if each letter had been drawn by the same pulse that now trembled in his hands. Outside, dusk appeared to answer its summons. The horizon dissolved between violet and black. The sea roared louder, and the wind slipped through the house's cracks, producing a continuous lament. He turned the pages. Some were blank. Others were covered with incomplete lines, hurried strokes. notes that seemed written in moments of despair. On one, he found only 2 words. She waited. On another, a sketch of a face drawn with shaky, unfinished lines, the outline of eyes perhaps, and the beginning of a smile that never came to be. His throat tightened, and a strange warmth climbed from his chest, in contrast to the cold of the room. Her name, the one he did not dare pronounce even inside his own thoughts, began to form, letter by letter, in a space of memory that refused to fade. The wind rose, and a candle forgotten on the sideboard lit itself, as if the air had learned the trick. The frail light outlined the room, furniture draped in sheets, a large mirror stained by time, an old iron bed, and a window left partially open, letting in the salty scent of the storm. And on the bed lay something that made him hesitate, a white dress carefully folded, far too clean to belong to this forgotten house. The key, still in his hand, pulsed again. He approached the dress with slow steps, as if afraid to disturb a ritual. He touched the fabric with his fingertips, cold yet light as if it had been left there only moments before. The touch brought a fleeting image. The same dress turning beneath the pale light of a distant morning, the muffled sound of laughter, the touch of a promise made in a low voice. And what if time had stopped exactly in that instant? The mansion answered. The creaking in the walls grew louder and the rain struck harder, as if the sky itself wanted to force a memory to the surface. He stepped back, and the floor groaned. Hollow. Different. He knelt and discovered, beneath the worn rug, a hatch. The wood was swollen with damp, yet still firm. In its center, a small opening seemed made for the key he now held. He hesitated. Memories, when they sleep too long, tend to wake hungry. His heart beat out of order, each pulse pushing the air with effort. The candle flickered. The sea sounded closer, as if the cliff had moved. With a decisive gesture, he fit the key. The metal turned without resistance, and the hatch opened with a muffled crack. The scent that rose from within was ancient, dense, tinged with wet earth and iron. A cold breath climbed out and wrapped the room, snuffing the candle at once. For a heartbeat, the darkness was complete. Only the rain and his own heart kept him company. As his eyes adjusted, he made out steps descending into the undercroft, and a faint glow from below, as if an ember or a lamp had endured beyond its time. He drew a deep breath and went down. Each step felt like a deeper plunge into consciousness, as if the path led not only to the cellar, but also into himself. The walls were stone, slick with moss, and the air grew heavier the farther he descended. The sea's voice now seemed to come from inside the house. And then, at the staircase's end, he saw a small circular chamber, almost a sanctum. At the center, a stone pedestal held an oval mirror without a frame, dusty yet intact. Around it, spent candles formed a ring, as if someone had lit them long ago and let them burn themselves to nothing. The mirror reflected only darkness. He approached slowly, a growing pressure building in his chest. There was something in that silent surface that seemed to throb, as if the glass were breathing. When he reached out, the reflection changed. For a brief instant, he saw not his own face, but that of a woman, pale, with loose hair and the same white dress from the bed. Her gaze passed through him, not with anger, but with an abyssal sorrow, almost compassion. Before he could move, the image dissolved, replaced by shadow. He staggered back, breathless. The mirror was cold now, but emitted a low sound, a murmur that blended with the sea. At the pedestal's base lay a small wooden box, engraved with the same symbol as the key, a heart. Inside, yellowed papers and a faded ribbon. He untied it carefully, and the lid opened to reveal a bundle of letters bound together. The paper smelled of jasmine. He took the first and began to read. The letters were shaky, handwritten yet unmistakable. They were not his. They were hers. If one day you return, do not do it out of guilt. The house will remember what you tried to forget. The promise was not about love. It was about what love would cost. The words burned like cold iron. He read on, breath short, chest tightening. Each letter brought a fragment of revelation, memories of a life shared, a vow made by the sea, a dusk when two souls swore never to abandon each other. And yet something had happened, something that parted them so definitively that even death seemed a gesture of continuity. The mirror shivered, catching a brief flare of light as if it reacted to the words. The last letter, stained and nearly illegible, said only, "When the sea returns to touch the house, I will be here, and you will be too." Thunder split the sky, shaking the floor. The mirror cracked in silence. For an instant, the house seemed to breathe with him. Then a sudden, impossible sensation crossed his body. He was no longer alone. She was there. The shape, the outline, the presence. Nothing about her seemed made of flesh or shadow. She inhabited an in-between, an existence suspended, as if the air had decided to take form for a moment, just to remind him that some promises do not dissolve with time. The female figure remained motionless, long damp hair falling over her shoulders, the white dress floating around bare feet lightly veiled in mist. There were no eyes, only the suggestion of a gaze, and he felt it all the same, cutting, ancient, recognizable. His heart raced, his whole body seized by a serene dread, the kind of fear that doesn't threaten, but warns. The lamp on the pedestal lit itself, spreading a trembling yellow light through the cellar. The cracked mirror returned her reflection in fragments. A divided face, a smile that seemed to be born and die at the same instant. He did not try to speak. He knew that here words had no voice. The air had grown too thick for any sound to cross. A shiver ran down his spine. Time began to contort again. Past and present trading places, the sea roaring inside his mind. He smelled brine, wilted flowers, oxidized iron. Memory flashed. A distant dusk, the beach turned amber, the cold wind, and her, alive, smiling, promising. Their hands joined over the sand, the simple, almost childish oath. Never forget me. But forgetting, treacherous, arrived dressed as necessity, and now what stood before him was the result of a memory that refused to die. The silhouette began to move. Slowly she took one step, then another. The sound of bare feet on stone was light, almost a whisper. When she stopped a few paces from him, the lamp wavered. He felt the cold change its nature, not the chill of weather, but the chill of presence. A cold that doesn't hurt, only warns that the invisible has just touched the visible. She extended one of her hands. The gesture was gentle, unhurried. Her fingers seemed made of mist, yet they had form, intent, and a silent plea. He wanted to step back, but something stopped him. Perhaps memory, perhaps the promise itself that held him there. Instinct, that voice older than reason, told him the gesture was not a threat. It was an invitation. The house responded. The walls moaned, and the ancient candles flared to life for a moment, casting shadows that danced like witnesses. The air swirled, and the sound of the sea seemed to invade the basement, not as noise but as breathing. She moved her lips. No sound came, yet he understood. Not through words, but through the vibration of memory within his chest. The message was clear. You promised. Guilt, that solid form of love, rooted itself inside him. The weight of decades fell upon his shoulders like frozen rain. The memory of the vow, of the separation, of the abandonment, of the silence that followed. All he had tried to erase. Returned, ordered, lucid, devastating. The mirror behind her began to fog, as though it were breathing along with them. Amid the haze, a phrase appeared, written by an invisible hand. Dusk waits. The lamp went out. Darkness swallowed everything for an instant. Then, as lightning flashed through the small window high in the wall, she was gone. In the place where she had stood lay only the white dress, perfectly folded, resting on the damp floor. The same dress from the bed, the same fabric, the same memory that refused to die. He knelt, touching the dress once more. It was cold, but dry. The fabric didn't feel old. It was fresh, as though just placed there. The mirror had fallen silent again, cracked but glowing faintly from within, a spark that wouldn't let him turn his back. He understood then that this was not an apparition. It was a warning. His heart raced. The sound of rain, the wind, the salt in the air, everything conspired to turn the past into the present once more. He climbed the stairs heavily, each step dragging him toward a painful clarity. When he emerged into the room, the air was lighter, yet the silence was deeper. The windows remained closed, but the sound of the sea now came from within, as if the walls themselves were breathing waves. The notebook still lay open on the table. The pages that had once been blank now held new words written only seconds ago, perhaps by the wind or by her. It isn't the house that keeps the promise. It's you. The shock took his breath away. The letters seemed to vibrate, pulsing with faint light. He felt the urge to run. But where? The mansion wasn't a place, it was a bond. And slowly he began to realize that his return hadn't been by chance. Fate, disguised as coincidence, had brought him back to settle what had been left suspended between love and death. He descended to the main hall. The fireplace, once dead, now burned with slow flames as though time itself had decided to warm its own memory. The portrait on the wall, the faceless one, was changing. The surface of the paint shifted and new lines began to emerge beneath the old pigment. The outline of eyes, a faint smile, and finally, the beginning of what seemed to be her face, the face he had tried to forget. The sound of the wind ceased completely. The house became still, attentive. The ancient clock on the wall began to tick again, marking hours that no longer existed. And there, standing before the fire, he understood the trap's full extent. It wasn't to he who had returned to the house. It was the house that had called him. The flames danced like slender fingers, their light reflecting on the dark wood and gold frames. In the glass of the window he saw his own reflection, tired, pale, eyes heavy with knowing. And behind him for an instant her reflection again, not as a ghost, but as a living memory, leaning against his shoulder, wearing the same sorrowful smile as before. And what if love had not ended but simply learned to exist in another way, between the world of the living and that of memory? What if his return were only the beginning of the promise-s reckoning, the inevitable reunion between the one who swore and the one who waited? The firelight flickered, casting a long shadow across the floor, the shadow of two people, though only one stood there. The clock stopped, and with it, time. The sound of the falling hand echoed through the house like an ancient summons, and the flames in the fireplace seemed to shrink in shame. He stood there still, feeling the air grow heavy, as if silence itself were watching him. The whisper that had haunted him still vibrated in his mind, soft and insistent, like a distant melody refusing to fade. Time has just begun again. Those words were not simple. They carried weight, purpose, something that felt older than his arrival, older even than memory itself. He looked around. The fire cast long shadows across the walls, forming fleeting figures that seemed to move on their own. The curtains swayed gently, though no breeze passed. The mansion breathed, alive, alert, and every creak of the wood was a syllable in a forgotten language. At the center of the hall, the portrait, now almost entirely restored by time itself, displayed her face. The paint, once dull, now gleamed with soft tones. Her gaze, fixed, met his with cruel precision. There was no sweetness nor anger, only a calm that disarmed him. He felt watched, not only by painted eyes but by something deeper, a presence that had circled him since the moment he entered the house. The memory of them, he and she, began to reassemble, like a silent film rewinding into life. Dusk by the sea, the wind playing with her hair, her gentle voice promising to wait, and he, swearing the impossible, eternal love, a certain return, never forgetting. Promises are easy to make when the future has not yet claimed its price. But the future, patient, always collects. Outside, the rain eased, but the sea's voice grew stronger, as though the waves had found a new rhythm. He stepped closer to the portrait and saw for the first time something he had missed before. In the painting's background, beyond the woman, was an open window, and through it, the sea, the same sea that roared now. a subtle detail, but loaded with meaning. It was as if the painter, or he himself, whoever he had been in that distant time, had recorded a portal. A sudden gust swept through the cracks and the fire wavered. The sensation was immediate. Someone had passed behind him. He turned quickly, but no one was there. Only the echo of his own footsteps, stretched by silence. Yet something had changed. The velvet armchair, once empty, was now occupied by a shadow, an indistinct form still watching the fire. He tried to move closer, but his body hesitated. Every fiber screamed caution, yet something deeper called him forward. The same force that had made him open the door, descend into the cellar, remain in this place. When he took the first step, the floor sighed softly, as if the house recognized him. The shadow shifted slightly, and for an instant even the sea seemed to fall silent. The air grew colder. The fire shrank. His heartbeat quickened, and then the shadow began to dissipate, revealing, under the wavering light, the figure of a woman. The same as before, but now sharper, closer to substance. The white dress glowed with golden undertones, as if fed by the fire. She did not seem threatening, only inevitable. And in that moment he understood. There was no return. What awaited him was neither punishment nor forgiveness. It was continuation. Love, when interrupted by death, becomes a force that time doesn't know how to store away. He felt it within his body, like a cold fever, a mixture of tenderness and terror. The fear of losing and the desire to find again had fused into one single sensation. She did not move, yet her presence filled the room. The air itself seemed to lean toward her. He took another step and noticed that the floor was wet. Water trickled through the cracks in the window, forming shallow pools that reflected the light of the fire. And in those reflections he saw scenes that did not belong to the present, the two of them walking hand in hand, laughing, making plans that would never be fulfilled. The reflection showed the past as if it were now. His heart raced too fast. He knew he stood at the edge of something, of a limit, but he also knew that the limit was the path. He stepped closer, and her figure seemed to glow. The house sighed, and the fire surged alive. For an instant, time aligned, and he saw it all with clarity. The love, the promise, the loss. And he realized that this meeting was not chance, but the exact point where what had been interrupted demanded to continue. Yet something was wrong. Beneath the tenderness of her presence was a warning. The promise, he understood, had not been only of love. It had been an exchange. Something had been given, something had been taken. The balance, broken long ago, now required repayment. Love had not returned alone. Destiny had accompanied it, patient, waiting for its due. The house trembled. The wind roared again, and the portrait on the wall fell, the glass shattering with a sharp crack. The fire went out. Everything fell into darkness. Only her voice, now clearly hers, soft and cold, rose inside him without crossing the air. What was promised must be fulfilled. The sound pierced through him like a blade of ice. The ground beneath him seemed to give way. His body lightened, his heart raced. And then the sea, the same sea from the painting, began to invade the hall, not with water but with sound. A constant roar, a vibration that made his entire body tremble. He looked around and realized the mansion was changing. The walls were breathing, the floor moved like sand, the portraits melted into liquid shadows. Everything became sea again. Everything became dusk. And in the middle of that dissolution he saw, just for an instant, brief as lightning, her face smiling. A smile that asked neither forgiveness nor pity, only fulfillment. Love, after all, was collecting what it was owed. The key turned on its own. The metallic sound echoed through the mansion like a drawn-out lament, as if every wall, every beam, every memory were sighing in unison. He didn't touch the door, yet it opened slowly, obeying a force not human. On the other side, the room, the same as before, was transformed. What had been a dusty chamber was now intact, alive, as if time had rolled back decades. The fire burned in the fireplace, casting golden reflections over velvet curtains and the embroidered rug. The window stood open, carrying in the scent of jasmine and the sea. There was the light of dusk, that golden, damp light that precedes night and whispers that something must be remembered. He hesitated on the threshold. The air there was different. Not merely warm, but dense, almost tangible, as if it held the breath of another century. He took one step and felt the floor vibrate beneath his feet, as if the very boards recognized his return. In the center of the room, atop a table covered with lace, rested an object wrapped in dark cloth. The cloth quivered lightly, though no wind touched it. Curiosity and fear guided him forward. He reached out and pulled the fabric away, revealing a small wooden box, pale and smooth, engraved with the same symbol as the key, a heart entangled with thorns. The lid opened on its own. Inside was a silver locket, old, with a black and white photograph. He held it, and a deep shiver ran through him. The image showed him and her, young, smiling, the sea behind them. On the back of the locket, an almost erased inscription read, "As long as dusk exists, so shall we." His mind seemed to collapse for a moment. The memory came rushing back in full. The afternoon, the wind, the sound of waves, the words he had sworn. Dusk had been their witness. The promise had not been made before God, but before time, and time, that ancient wisdom, does not forgive those who defy it. Her voice, not from the air but from within him, manifested again, clearer, nearer. "You promised you'd return before the dusk ended, and dusk never ended." He braced himself against the table, trying to breathe. The room spun, the light flickered, and the sound of the sea now seemed to pound from within the walls. The curtains billowed, the fire flared, and the photograph in the locket began to change. Their faces still smiled, but her eyes slowly turned, meeting his directly, as if the image itself were alive. Tears came without his noticing. There was love, but also horror. The realization that what bound them was not only feeling but debt. A bond sealed not by affection, but by guilt. The wind surged and the locket slipped from his hand, falling onto the rug. When he bent to retrieve it, he noticed something on the floor. Beneath the rug, a circular mark carved into the wood. The same heart-shaped symbol. Within the circle, faint letters etched in an ancient tongue, yet clear enough for the soul to understand before the mind could translate. To promise is to open the door. His body trembled. Once again the house responded, as if breathing with him. The walls groaned, the fire roared, and the sea's sound consumed everything. Then the light shifted. A shadow crossed the room, swift, fluid, as though moving between time and space. The mirror on the wall, the same one that had once reflected the past, glimmered faintly. He stepped closer. In its reflection, he saw the room exactly as it was, except for one thing. There were two people inside it. He and her. Standing side by side, looking into each other's eyes, but only in the mirror. The reflection showed what the present still refused to accept. The vision was of a terrible sweetness. In the reflection, she touched him, a simple gesture yet heavy with tenderness and tragedy, her hand resting on his face as if in blessing or farewell. And in that instant, as it happened in the reflection, he felt the warmth and the cold of the touch in his body. It was no illusion. It was memory made flesh. The mirror shuddered. A crack split its center, dividing their reflections. Beyond the glass, her image began to fade, dissolving into mist. Then a single drop, falling from nowhere, landed on the mirror and slid slowly downward. He touched the surface and realized it was not water. It was a tear. The cracks multiplied, and with each fissure a feeling of loss spread through the room. The fireplace went out, the wind stopped, and the world seemed to fold in on itself. His reflection vanished completely, leaving only hers, still, her gaze fixed, pleading for something he did not know how to give. And then, a phrase, written on the inside of the mirror, appeared in trembling handwriting identical to that in the notebook. To fulfill the promise, one must remember what it cost. The floor trembled and the circular symbol beneath the rug began to glow with a faint light. The locket, which had lain still moments before, started to vibrate, emitting a metallic pulse, like a heart beating within iron. He felt his chest burn, not from pain but from recognition. The vibration came from within, as if something inside him were answering the call. And what if the promise had not been one of love alone? What if, to keep it alive, he had given something that time had now returned to claim? Questions gathered like a storm. The sea roared outside, but also inside him. The boundary between memory and reality dissolved, and the house became the stage where past and present finally met to settle their debts. He knew now that he was being guided. Every door, every sound, every vision had been a step toward the exact moment when everything was sealed, the dusk in which he had sworn the impossible. The painting seemed alive. The colors, though old, pulsed beneath the glow of the fire, which now burned with unnatural strength, scattering golden sparks across the room. He studied each brushstroke, the turbulent sea in the background, the frozen sunset on the horizon, and at the center himself and her standing hand in hand before infinity. But what unsettled him was not the couple. It was the shadow between them, tall, formless, faceless, an absence with edges. The longer he looked, the faster his heart raced. That shadow, he knew in some deep and wordless way, was not symbol, not art. It was memory, a real presence impressed upon the painting as a witness to the promise. And what if their love had not been sealed between two hearts alone, but under the gaze of something that never forgets? The fire bent, as if pushed by an invisible wind, and a sound echoed, the soft ticking of a clock he could not see, marking the return of time. The mansion shuddered and the painting stirred, first at its edges, then at its core. The figures began to move slightly. Their joined hands trembled, the sea churned, and the shadow wrapped around them like a veil. He stepped back. The air vibrated. The sea's voice rose again, and a chill crawled across the floor, up the walls. Suddenly the fire went out and the room fell into darkness. What followed was not silence, but breathing. Not his own, someone else's. Something else's. Instinct screamed for him to run, but his body did not obey. A force, soft yet absolute, held him there, as if the house itself had clenched around him. The breathing grew closer, slow, steady, and the air took on the scent of salt and iron. Then a voice, the same sweet and terrible, rose again, coming from every direction and from within his chest. It was not only love you promised. It was presence, and presence has a price. The words slid through the air like silk dragged over stone. His heart seemed to stop. His mind reached backward into memory but found only broken fragments. The dusk, her hand in his, the sea, the vow, and a third sensation beyond them both. An ancient cold. A wind that had stopped blowing just to listen. He understood then, with the clarity that comes too late, that the promise had been made with a witness. Not a god, not a man, but dusk itself. That brief space where day dies and night has not yet been born. A place where time is fragile, and what is spoken there becomes eternal. The room changed again. The walls pulsed with dim light, and the shadow from the painting began to project outward, slowly, fluidly, like thick smoke. His body reacted before thought. First a shiver, then a step backward, another. The shadow stretched across the floor, climbing the legs of the table, gliding over the rug until it touched his feet. The cold it emitted was impossible, a chill that seemed to rise from the bottom of the sea. He tried to move, but his body would not respond. The shadow coiled around his waist, rising gradually, and amid the terror he felt a strange familiarity, as if the darkness knew him. Love and fear merged, and for the first time he understood they were the same thing. Two faces of the same vow. The voice came again, closer now. You asked time to stop, and it stopped, but what does not move and decays. The words echoed in his skull, tearing open memories time had tried to bury. He saw dusk again, in merciless clarity, her by the shore, white dress stained with sand, wind spinning the waves into golden spirals. He kneeling, begging that time not take her away. And time, a living creature, obeyed, but nothing is given for free. Dusk, generous and hungry, accepted the promise. Love would be eternal, but life would have to be repaid in fragments. And since that moment, she had waited. The shadow enveloped him completely, and the world vanished. He felt pressure in his chest, the sea roaring inside his head, the taste of salt on his tongue. And beneath the fear, her voice, soft, human now, whispered, "Eternity is only the beautiful name for captivity." When he opened his eyes again, he was back in the corridor. The house had returned to its initial state. Dark, silent, motionless. The fireplace dead, the portrait on the floor, the wind gone. Everything the same except for one detail that froze his blood. His clothes were wet, as if he had just emerged from the sea. The floor beneath him left prints of water, and as he walked, he noticed something disturbing. The footprints did not end where he stood. They continued ahead as though someone had gone before him. They were small, delicate. Hers. He followed them, his heart stuttering out of rhythm. The corridor led back to the main hall where the footprints ended before the front door. He looked outside. The storm had passed, yet the sky remained the same eternal dusk. Golden, motionless, the sun suspended over the sea like an open wound. And above the doorframe, something new gleamed, an ancient inscription that hadn't been there before. Letters carved deep into the wood as though the house itself had decided to speak. He stepped closer to read, and the chill ran through him. As long as dusk exists, the promise will not rest. His heart understood what his mind feared. He was trapped in a cycle. Time had stopped, and he, the promised one, had never truly left. His steps were heavy, yet measured, like the rhythm of an ancient clock. Each sound reverberated against the walls, expanding until it seemed the whole house was breathing with him. The man stood still, eyes fixed at the top of the staircase. Darkness ruled the upper corridor, but something moved there. A presence unhurried, a shadow more solid than the others. Then the whisper came, low, drawn out, with a texture like wet stone. It was not her voice. It was something older. He made the promise, and I witnessed it. The words crossed the air without vibration, as if they didn't need sound to exist. His chest tightened, and instinct told him to step back. But it was already too late. The house did not allow return. The staircase before him now seemed longer, as though space itself stretched to push the exit farther away. The walls pulsed faintly, breathing with him, and the air carried a new scent, damp earth, moss, and rust. The shadow began to descend. First, the steps near the top grew darker. Then, the outline of a figure emerged, tall, bent, as if burdened by the weight of centuries. The face, however, remained indistinct, suspended between what the eye could see and what the mind invented to endure. The body seemed made of smoke and flesh at once, and wherever its feet touched, the wooden boards darkened. He stepped back, but the voice stopped him. "Fear not what you have created." The phrase cut through the air, dry, precise. Created. The word echoed inside him like a bell. He tried to grasp its meaning, and the past answered, splitting through the fog of forgetfulness like lightning tearing the sky. Dusk, the shore, the woman kneeling before him, eyes filled with both fear and love, the sea surrounding them in its ceaseless murmur. He, young and desperate in the face of imminent loss, begging that time stop, that death not take her. And then, the voice, not hers. A third one, born of wind and salt and stone. A presence that had heard his plea and answered, "If you desire eternity, pay with the cycle." That night, in the fever of despair, he had agreed. He had promised what he did not understand, signed not with ink, but with his heart. Eternity for love in exchange for endless return. She would live, but bound to the dusk, and he by consequence would never escape it. The promise had locked them both in suspended time, and the witness was dusk itself, lord of transitions, keeper of unfinished halves. Now the figure stood before him, on the final step. The room darkened further. The air chilled until his breath turned visible. He lifted his face, trying to see what hid within that half-light. The faint glow of the fireplace, rekindled without flame, revealed only fragments. A face without eyes, wearing an expression of serene neutrality, almost divine, almost human. She asked for love. You asked for permanence. I gave both, but love cannot bear the weight of forever. The voice, though not angry, carried the tone of inevitability, the kind of truth that does not accuse, only exists. His body weakened, his knees buckled. The shadow closed around him, cold, cutting through skin. Each word became a blade of remembrance. He thought without sound, but was understood. What do you want from me now? The end. The answer came instantly, one word but carrying the weight of centuries. The end, not as destruction but as closure. The circle had to close, and to do so, something taken had to be returned. The fireplace flared into blue fire, casting images on the walls. He and she dancing in the hall, laughing, promising. She falling ill. He desperate, pleading with the sea. And finally, the moment of the pact. The sea retreating, the sun halting on the horizon, and the shadow emerging between them. She had lived, but time had stopped with her. Since then, they had both been bound. He condemned to return, she condemned to wait. And dusk, the intermediary, had kept the balance. The shadow extended a hand, long, thin, translucent. In its palm a faint glow, the same key that had once opened the white door. The cycle may end, but there is a price. His throat dried, his body felt heavy. The key drifted toward him and rested in his hand. The metal was icy. To break the cycle, you must return what you took. The gaze, if it could be called that, fell upon him with quiet weight. The meaning surfaced in his mind like an ancient thought rising from deep water. Return what you took, her life. A thunderclap tore the sky, shaking the house. The fire went out. The shadow vanished. Only the key remained, dimly glowing in his palm. Silence returned. The only sound was the sea, now calm, almost compassionate. He knew what had to be done, but his heart resisted. To kill love would be the final form of loving. To free her would mean losing her forever. He climbed the stairs again, the weight of fate pressing on his shoulders. Each step grew colder, damper, as if the house itself tried to dissuade him. At the top, the white door waited, slightly ajar. The light spilling from within was gold, the same gold that had colored every dusk of his life. She was there, sitting at the edge of the bed, her white dress flowing like mist, her face serene. Not a ghost, not a memory, a presence. Time itself had bent to allow that moment. He approached. She lifted her eyes. The look said everything: pain, love, waiting. No words were spoken. None were needed. She knew what he carried. The golden light filled the room until every particle of air became radiance. Shadows fled, dissolving like dust in calm wind. Time lost its shape. Everything hung suspended, as if the world inhaled between two heartbeats. She remained seated, hands resting in her lap, the white dress rippling softly. Her face, now completely clear, was the same one that had lived in his memories. Pale skin, soft chin, lips slightly parted, eyes of infinite tenderness. But there was something new, a piece he had never seen before. No pain, only understanding. The key glowed in his hand. The metal pulsed with the rhythm of his heart. He felt warmth and cold alternating between his fingers, as if the object were alive. The voice of dusk, or perhaps of time itself, echoed in his mind. Return what you took. He knelt before her. Tears came, slow, inevitable. They were not tears of despair, but of acceptance. Each drop fell and vanished before touching the rug, absorbed by the light that filled everything. She watched him without moving. Her eyes held all seasons, the winter of absence, the summer of reunion, the autumn of broken vows, and deep within them shimmered the reflection of the sea. The same sea that had bound them, the same that had cursed them. He lifted the key. The symbol of the heart entwined in thorns shone brighter, as if recognizing the moment. The entire house seemed to sigh, and the sound of the sea ceased completely. It was the instant. Her voice then spoke for the first time, soft as wind passing through a veil. "You came back." The sound passed through his chest like music and blade at once. He wanted to answer, but the words dissolved in the air, undone by the weight of emotion. Instead, he stepped closer. He touched her face, and the touch was real. Warm, human, alive. For the first time since it had all begun, he felt time moving again. She closed her eyes and a single tear fell. He understood the gesture. She knew what was coming. The eternity that had bound them was about to break, and the price would be shared by both. The light around them pulsed once, twice, 3 times, like the final breath of a sunset that refuses to die. He placed the key upon her chest. The symbol glowed, and the deepest sound he had ever heard resonated, not from outside, but from within the world itself, as if the sea had stopped breathing. The floor vibrated. The walls shivered. The window burst open and a golden wind flooded the room, scattering invisible petals of light. She smiled. A gentle smile, the kind that belongs to those who understand. And in the next instant, light consumed her completely, her body turning to reflection, then to dust, then to pure radiance. The dress lingered in the air for a heartbeat, then vanished. The key fell to the floor with a soft chime, almost like a bell. He picked it up. It was cold now, dull, without shine. The promise had been broken, or fulfilled. Perhaps both were the same. The silence that followed was unlike any before, no longer tense, no longer waiting. It was the silence of rest. The house seemed smaller, the walls lighter, as if part of its structure had been freed with her. He looked around. Everything had changed subtly. The curtains now allowed sunlight to pass. The fire burned calmly. The air smelled of dry wood. For the first time since his return, dusk no longer surrounded him. Outside, night had finally fallen. But relief came hand in hand with another feeling, emptiness, where once her presence had lingered, in echoes, in visions, in the walls themselves. There was now only space. The weight of eternity had turned into lightness, and that lightness hurt. He descended the stairs in silence. The sound of his steps was natural, human. The wood no longer groaned with memory. In the hall, the portrait was gone. In its place, an open window welcomed the night breeze. The sea below breathed in gentle waves. For the first time, he saw the horizon without the frozen sun. The moon climbed, white and calm, over the water. Time, at last, was moving again. Near the door, something made him pause. A small metallic object, and ring. He recognized it instantly. It was hers. He picked it up carefully, and as he did, a faint warmth filled his palm. A final trace of her presence. A wordless goodbye. And he understood. The promise had never been just between two hearts. It had been between love and time. He had begged time to stop, but now time had asked love to let it flow. The balance was restored. He looked through the open door. The night wind brushed his face, cool and serene. Behind him, the mansion was only a house again. Ancient, empty, at peace. The eternal dusk had ended. The night received him like a veil. The air outside was soft and sweet, carrying the scent of flowers that grew between the stones of the garden. The house, now silent, rested behind him like a memory that had finally learned to sleep. No whispering wind through the windows, no echo in the corridors, only stone, wood, and time. He descended the stone steps slowly, his body lighter but fragile, every motion feeling new, as if relearning existence in a world that had begun to move again. Below, the sea breathed in calm rhythm. The waves came and went, obedient to the moon now ruling the sky. For the first time, the sea did not call to him. It cradled him. At the cliff's edge, he turned back. The mansion glowed softly from within, not by fire or candlelight, but with a diffuse brightness, as if it emanated from the walls themselves, from the story within. And for a moment he saw a woman's shadow on the balcony, not the same as before, but a peaceful presence woven from memory and gratitude. She raised her hand in farewell. His heart tightened, and tears came once more. But there was no sadness, only tenderness. Eternity had ended, and that was good. Love, freed from the weight of promise, could finally return to where it had always belonged. The human heart, fragile, fleeting, finite, and therefore true. The wind rose, carrying the scent of the sea. He inhaled deeply, filling his lungs with the taste of beginning. There was no more suspended sunset. The sun had gone, and the night promised renewal. Stars began to appear one by one, lighting the sky like peaceful memories. He followed the stone path down to the shore. The wet sand met him, cool and real beneath his feet. The sound of the waves, serene now, resembled an old lullaby. He knelt by the water and placed the key into the sea. The metal disappeared without resistance, swallowed by foam, and the moon's reflection rippled apart. For a fleeting instant he felt her touch again, not as ghost but as presence, a caress in the air. And he heard her voice within him, no longer sorrowful, only calm. Every promise kept returns time to its place. He smiled. For the first time in years, the smile was simple. The sea withdrew, and the foam drew shapes that quickly dissolved. He stood there, watching the horizon. Night advanced, and the chill rose from the waves. But the cold no longer threatened. It was life. As he walked back, he saw that the garden, once dark and barren, now bloomed under the moon. Jasmine, ivy, pale blossoms, each releasing a scent long asleep. The house no longer watched. It dreamed, and as he crossed the iron gate, he knew he would never return. The road awaited, narrow, veiled in mist. He walked without looking back. With every step, the fog opened, revealing the outline of the town below. Windows lit, distant voices, the murmur of life. Time moved forward, merciless and beautiful, indifferent to memory, yet grateful for it. By the time he reached the main road, the sky had begun to pale. The first sign of dawn brushed the horizon silver blue, and the sea far below seemed to breathe deeper. Content, he turned one last time and saw the mansion's peak fade into the mist. A cycle had closed. His body ached for rest, but his soul, light at last, longed to walk. He found a stone bench by the roadside and sat. Her ring still rested in his hand. He turned it in the dim morning light, watching its faint glimmer mirror the sky. The heart engraved within had changed, no longer thorns, but branches, as if pain had become root. He closed his hand around it, pressing it to his chest. He looked toward the horizon one final time and whispered, "The dusk is over, but love is not." The sun broke through the mist, gilding the sea and the stones, and the wind carried his final words away, perhaps back to the house, perhaps into time itself. The gulls began to fly, the world awoke, and he finally understood what she had meant in her last whisper. To live is also a kind of promise. He rose. The road ahead was long, but there was no hurry. Every step now was choice, not curse, and as the sun climbed higher, the sea returned gentle echoes, not of sorrow, but of memory. The memory of a love that defied the impossible, broke through time, and finally rested in what destiny had always demanded: the end. But deep beneath the waves, where silence meets light, a single golden spark remained, a trace of promise, an echo of dusk. And the sea, eternal witness, kept their story. For some loves, even when freed, never vanish. They only change shape. And the wind, crossing the cliff, seemed to carry the last verse of a forgotten vow. As long as memory exists, there will be return. But return, at last, shall not be prison. It shall be peace.